welcome once again to Sid Caudle. Who's been in trouble? My goodness, Sid. I hear things about you on Patrick Christie's show on Friday night. And I said to you when you told me about it, you're going to be banned. Are you going to be banned?
Well, I don't know, but it's quite interesting, you see, because GB News is a free speech channel. And no one is actually suggesting, or I don't think anyone is suggesting, that what I said was untrue. I was referring, by the way, to Sadiq Khan going to Mecca and coming back from Mecca looking absolutely awful, which I think, yeah, I think he did. And I suggested that when he went to Mecca, there was no evidence whatsoever that Muhammad was ever there, which there isn't. I mean, you can't go to Mecca and see, oh, this is where Muhammad lived and look through Muhammad's house or anything. There's literally nothing there whatsoever. And I said, and then he would have circled the Kaaba and kissed the black stone, which is what people do on the Hajj to Mecca. I said, but the black stone is a meteorite that fell out of the sky that people used to worship long before Muhammad. I said, and the fact is that Islam is a nonsense religion. Well, he really didn't like me saying that. And I think the main reason he didn't like me saying it was because as the Reform mayor candidate was there, Leila Cunningham, on the panel, and she's a Muslim. So it's like, and of course, GB News is very pro-reform. So they didn't like me saying that because it was an insult to Leila Cunningham. Although, interestingly enough, he didn't let her come back. So rather than being impartial and saying to a Muslim on the panel, okay, what have you got to say in response to this? He literally just said, I'm sure there's many Muslims all over the world that would take issue with what you've said there, and later on, they made another comment saying that we should make it clear that Sadiq Khan said that he very much enjoyed his trip to Mecca and felt it was a wonderful example of humanity coming together or something. So twice they actually tried to respond to what I said, though, as I say, there was no suggestion that what I said was untrue in any way, shape, or form.
No.
It is a fact. You can put it into Google, you can ask AI. It is a fact that the black stone was worshipped long before Muhammad appeared. Whatever the black stone is, but even in Islamic tradition, it says that the black stone was appeared out of the sky. It almost certainly was a meteorite that came out of the sky. That's why people started worshipping it, and that's why Muslims pray towards Mecca because of the black stone.
Well, I'm trying to think actually. I sort of take in my mind often the other people's point of view to see if it makes any sense. And can you imagine the same thing or reaction if somebody on the panel or in the audience that, as you were, said, "Oh, I don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I think his friends moved the stone and it was all a plot." Now, as a Christian, you would reject that, but you wouldn't be in trouble with, "Do I smell Ofcom behind all this?"
Well, possibly, though, interestingly enough, on a previous program, one of the panelists did actually say, all these stories in the Bible about Jesus were only recorded 200 years after his death. And I immediately said, that's complete nonsense. I mean, for a start, two of the gospel writers were disciples of Jesus, so were actually with him that knew him. And Luke, who was, has been referred to as one of the greatest historians in antiquity, I mean, he finishes his writing when Paul was in Rome, which we believe was about 55 AD. It's inconceivable that if Luke was writing after Peter and Paul had died, that he wouldn't have written about their death. So, it's almost certain that Luke was writing before Peter and Paul died, which would have been about 60 AD. And Luke says that he's writing after the others. He said many other people have already written a record. So I thought I would write a careful historical record, having examined the facts. And this evidence that Mark is writing before Caiaphas died. Caiaphas died in 39 AD. Jesus was crucified about 32 AD because Mark never mentions his name. All the other apostles mention the fact that Jesus was taken before Caiaphas. And John actually says, taken before Caiaphas, who was high priest at that time. So John makes it clear he's writing after Caiaphas ceased to be high priest. But Mark doesn't mention his name. He just says Jesus was taken before the high priest. And the obvious reason for that would be if Caiaphas was still high priest at the time that Mark was writing. Because if he was still high priest, he wouldn't have needed to mention his name. He was the high priest.
Yes, indeed. The whole point of all this is perhaps as Christians we don't kick off as much as the Muslims do.
Well, we don't have protection from Ofcom. That's absolutely clear. I mean, Ofcom has proved itself to be incredibly anti-Christian. And yes, I mean, I'm sure GB News were concerned that somebody in the audience was basically saying Islam is a nonsense religion and giving evidence, and it's like, and they would have been concerned about Ofcom's response. Well, Ofcom wouldn't be in the slightest bit concerned about somebody saying that all the stories about Jesus were written at least 200 years after his death, even though it's complete nonsense and provably false. But it's also interesting to see the other thing that occurred to me from this is that they're not primarily interested in what is true. Because, as I say, no one suggested that what I said wasn't true. And they're primarily interested in whether you're insulting powerful forces. And the force of Islam is a powerful force. And they're not concerned about insulting Christians. They are concerned about insulting Muslims because of the way Muslims kick off. And I think it's very, very unfortunate that they have so much power that they can't tell the truth. And the other thing, of course, you see, is that in Pakistan, which is a Muslim country, they have this law 295C. If you criticize Muhammad or the Quran, you can have life imprisonment or even capital punishment. That's in the law. Now we don't have any law in this country. If you criticize Jesus, you can have life imprisonment for criticizing Jesus. Why? Because Jesus can stand criticism. You can say Jesus never lived, and then somebody can come back with overwhelming historical evidence that proves he did. But Muhammad is so open to criticism, and the Quran is so open to criticism, and Muslims can't defend him. That's the reality of it. So because they can't defend him, they have to have a law saying if you attack Muhammad or if you attack the Quran, you'll be put to death or you'll have life imprisonment. I mean, that's the reality of it.
There's Sid, lots of breaking news today. The first thing is, of course, our friend Sir Keir with the Chagos Islands. And the Donald has said through one of his representatives, well, one option is for me to buy them. Now, that's fascinating. I mean, in actual legal terms, the deal would have to be done whereby the islands were ceded back to Mauritius.
Yes.
And then Trump can put his oar in and say, right, I'll buy them. Would that save to the United Kingdom Treasury? Probably. But there's something behind this, like there's something behind the man of Sir Keir Starmer, that really people have sussed him, but they've not sussed him completely. What is it with Starmer and China? Now, he's let this mega embassy go ahead, whereby they can spy on us by drilling a meter hole through one of their basement rooms into all our communications network. And then Mauritius are extremely friendly with China, and he's given Chagos to the Mauritians. What is it about the man?
Well, in my view, I've always said that Starmer's a globalist, and he's not primarily interested in defending the United Kingdom. He's primarily interested in promoting global issues. And we've seen this during his period as Prime Minister, where he spent more time abroad than he has in this country. he doesn't seem to be particularly interested in changing Britain. He's more interested in international issues. And even now, today, he's hosting some meeting in Downing Street with the president of France and the president of Germany and Zelensky from Ukraine. And this is what he's primarily interested in: global issues. Now, when it comes to Chagos, there's been some ruling from the International Court to say that Mauritius has a right to the Chagos Islands, which, in my view, is complete nonsense. And in any case, the rulings of the International Court are advisory, they're not compulsory. But Starmer, being a globalist, says, oh, if that's what they've said, if that's what they've said, we've got to go along with the International Court. I believe in the International Court. I believe in international law. I believe we have to follow international law. So we have to do what they say. And by the way, this is also what the Foreign Office has been saying, because the Conservative Party, before Starmer came along, was also going down this line. But they say that, oh, we were just playing along. We were never going to actually do it. We were just playing along with the Foreign Office. But they should have had the guts to turn around to the Foreign Office and said, no, we're not giving away the Chagos Islands, and we're not following this law, this ruling, sorry, from the International Court. This is advisory, and we don't have to follow it, and we're not going to follow it. That's what they should have said. But they didn't. They went along with it, and then Starmer picked it up and said, "Yeah, I'm going to implement it." It's nonsense. And the figure, by the way, is 35 billion that is going to cost the country over a period of 99 years, which is just utter nonsense. And of course, Trump has come along and said, "Okay, tell Mauritius they can have the islands, and we'll tell Mauritius they can't, and we'll have them."
Yeah, there's a lot of fascinating things happening here. And I've got the $64,000 question because people are asking it. And they're saying, well, look, is Sir Keir simply a very bad politician, a very bad, unpopular prime minister? Or is there something very dark? Some people say evil about what he's getting up to.
Well, as I say, he's a globalist. And you see, earlier you mentioned China. You see, China in global institutions is very powerful. It has a very powerful place in the World Health Organization, even though COVID-19 started in China, which no one questions that it started in China. Apparently, China is going to be the primary controller of the World Health Organization. So in a future pandemic, China will make the rules for the whole world. And Starmer's not somebody who's going to stand up and say, no, we're not allowing that. He's someone who says, oh, yeah, fine, if we have to do whatever the World Health Organization says. I mean, he's a globalist. And as a globalist, he's a very bad UK prime minister. That's the reality of it. But of course, the whole global thing, the world ruler, is something which is predicted in the Bible, in Revelation. We're going to have a world ruler. So, he's actually moving towards fulfilling what the Bible says. And, I'm not saying that, that the Bible or God wants this to happen. He doesn't want it to happen, but he's telling us as a warning of what they're planning to do.
New polls are out, and several of them actually, not major ones, but significant ones. And it appears that suddenly people have decided not to return to the EU, even given the choice. Now, we've always been told until recently we're not in favour of Brexit any longer, that 50-odd% of us now want to go back into Europe. This poll is quite stunning. And it says, no, there's been a big reaction and we want out, Sid, permanently, which is encouraging if it's correct.
Well, yes, I don't believe these polls. I never believe these polls saying that most people want us to return to the European Union. You see, a lot depends on what question they ask. See, if they ask, we know this anyway from the way they do polls. But if they come along and say, do you think that leaving the European Union has been a success? Now, a lot of people will say no, because we've never really properly implemented Brexit. Because first of all, we had Theresa May that was basically against it. She voted for Remain, and she said things like, leave means leave, and better no deal than a bad deal, and then came up with an absolutely terrible deal that just tied us into everything in Europe. Well, fortunately, that was rejected. But then Boris Johnson came along and he produced a better deal, but it was still a deal that was like, oh no, for the next 2 years we'll do this, and then we'll make a decision. And he was sort of like happy with that because it was just 2 years, and then we could go along and leave properly. And obviously major issues over Northern Ireland. It would have been much better if we just left the European Union with no deal at all, because then we could have imposed tariffs on the EU. They export far more to us than we export to them, to the tune of around about 90 billion per year. So if we impose tariffs on their goods, we get a lot more from them than if they impose tariffs on our goods. That's the reality of it. So tariffs would have actually brought us back to equilibrium. And Mervyn King said this, by the way, who was governor of Bank of England at the time. He actually said that a deal only ties in the advantage that the EU has. It's of no benefit to us. But so people ask the question, pollsters ask the question, do you think we benefit from leaving the EU? And a lot of people say no, because we haven't done it properly. But that doesn't mean that those people that say no say, well, I want to go back to the EU. That's never been the case that people want to go back to the EU because they said, Brexit hasn't been a success. But that's a conclusion that pollsters have drawn. A majority of people say Brexit hasn't been a success, so the majority of people want to go back to the EU. No, and
Yeah,
that's what this poll has finally revealed. The
yeah, it is interesting, all this, because there is now an expectation that in the next election, whenever that is, earlier or later, who nobody knows, but mainly perhaps in Makerfield, it's about to raise its ugly head. In other words, will part of the next manifesto of whichever party include Brexit? Will it also say, well, at the same time, we will get out of Europe or we will go back in? Clearly, Sir Keir wants to get back in now, and he's doing everything within his power to make that happen. But assuming if he's hoisted away from the action by Andy Burnham, will Burnham want to go back in? Will it become not only Makerfield and his coronation, that's Andy himself, will it be also getting back into Europe?
Well, I'm quite sure Andy Burnham would happily take us back into the EU, but he doesn't want the EU to be an issue in the Makerfield by-election, and has desperately tried to make it clear to people that as far as he's concerned, he's not interested in talking about the EU, and he's got to accept that we've left and all this sort of thing, because he doesn't want it to be an issue. Because if it is an issue, Makerfield voted 67% to leave, one of the largest percentages anywhere. They voted overwhelmingly for reform in the last local elections. And if the issue is the EU, then he's going to lose. And by the way, we've also had a Survation poll that's just said that he's going to get 49% of the vote to reform 39%. I don't believe it for 1 minute. I believe it's a fake poll. And they produced these polls in order to make it appear that, oh, it's a fait accompli, there's not even much point in going in campaigning because Labour are bound to win, they're 10% ahead. And I can almost certainly tell you that when we actually get the final result on June the 18th, you'll find that, well, if Labour win the seat, it'll be very, very narrow margin, very narrow margin. There's no way Labour are going to win this seat by 10%. No way. That is just a fake poll.
Big mate of allegedly Sir Keir is Sir Tony, He's written that infamous document, nearly 6,000 words long, that we've mentioned in previous editions of this show. And a lot of pundits are now questioning what happened in that 3-term period of his election, the longest ever in any socialist Labour time in power. You've got to give him credit at least for that. But things are coming back to haunt him, Sid, big time. And people are now questioning this. I mean, obviously, the Iraq War, which was a disaster. Thank you, Sir Tony. But the whole thing with the universities. More than half the kids must go to university, said Sir Tony. And frankly, in one way or another, that's been a disaster. He's given freedom, if you wish, to Wales and to Scotland. Boy, and that's haunting everybody at the moment in many, many ways. If you think this is a disjointed government in Westminster, just look at Wales, just look at Scotland. And he was the instrument of all this, together with We Don't Do God.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I've said many times that it's very interesting the difference between Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, because Margaret Thatcher actually said, I don't want to be on the television all the time, because if I'm on television all the time, people will get fed up with listening to me. I'm just going to get on with running the country. And one of her things that she said is, you may not agree with me now, but in time you'll see that I'm right. And I remember distinctly that in 1991, when it came to the end of her time as Prime Minister, and she made a great speech in the House of Commons, which was her valedictory speech. And she was interviewed by several people, as to her period in office, which had been lasted for 11 years. It was a long period. They actually said, you've transformed the economy in the country. And she said, the credit that you're giving me for transforming the economy is a very big credit. The fact that I've actually achieved that and you're saying that I've achieved it basically means that my period in office has been a tremendous success. Now, if you compare what she did with what Tony Blair did, you see, Tony Blair came in with spin, managing the day's news, and he did it very well with the help of Alastair Campbell. The next day, the news was always very favourable to Labour. They basically made sure that they got journalists on side in all the major news outlets and all the major papers. And if anyone did a critical report of Tony Blair, Alastair Campbell would be straight onto them. You know, what's this report about? Why are you critical of Tony Blair? We're not going to allow you to come to press conferences. We're not going to let you ask questions if you're going to be printing these sort of reports. That was what was going on. So they effectively managed the news. Now, the result of that was that Tony Blair remained incredibly popular, especially during his first term. It began to wane during his second term, and I actually believe that by the 2005 election, he would have been kicked out, but for the fact that Michael Howard was now Conservative leader, and he was considered to be a man of the night, and people thought better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, and people didn't want Michael Howard in, frankly. So they wanted Tony Blair out, but they didn't want Michael Howard in. That was the reality of it. And it wasn't until 2010 that Labour finally got kicked out. But when you look back at Tony Blair's period in office, at the time he was very popular, but in retrospect, he made some terrible decisions. Complete opposite of Margaret Thatcher. At the time, she was very unpopular, but in retrospect, you say she transformed the country.
Yes, indeed. Sid, we'll move across the pond to Trump, see if we've got anything to learn from America. He's made so many bold moves based on, of course, his business nous. He's not your average president or prime minister. He's served his time in business and it's worked for him. And he's a business leader in whatever way he's dealing, whether it's abroad, international, a war, or at home. Now, let's stay at home in America. Detroit has really been suffering over the years. Lots of jobs let go there. And this is the center of vehicle manufacturing in the US. And rather than let it be taken over by the foreigners, he said, right, if you're going to sell vehicles here, you've got a 35% tariff going on. Now, initially, this was because of Mexico. Everything was outsourced, if you like, to Mexico, and it was costing jobs. But it's the rest of the world that are bringing. If you want to ship your Volvo, your foreign Ford, your Chrysler, foreign Chrysler, into Detroit, then you pay 35%. I can't see that happening anywhere in Europe, let alone Great Britain.
Yes, it's interesting, you see, but actually Trump started this during his first term, to make it difficult for companies to be outsourcing all their factories and everything. And it wasn't just Mexico, it was also China. So a lot of companies were saying, oh, we can produce things cheaper in Mexico and in China and even in Canada than we can in the United States. So it was like, just do all the production there and then ship it all in. And Trump was the first person to actually say, no, I'm going to stop this process. We've got to bring the jobs back to America. And he did it by imposing tariffs. Now, it's very interesting because the economists have all said, oh, if you have tariffs, we'll have a world recession and it'll be disastrous for economies all over the world. It hasn't happened. We haven't had a world recession because of the tariffs. And actually, the American economy is doing very well. I mean, you look at the figures, their growth is around about 2.5% compared to our growth, which is just over 1%. And we're supposedly relying on the traditional thing, we've got to have a trade deal with the EU and we've now got this trade deal with the EU. We're now aligning ourselves even more closely to the EU to make trade even easier. And this is, and it's not worked. That's the reality is that we haven't got the growth which Labour promised. They promised they'd go for growth. You see, they had this idea that if we align ourselves closer with the EU, that's what will bring back growth. You see, so that's why they promised, we're going for growth. We're going to get growth. But it hasn't happened. It hasn't worked. So basically, all their economic models are wrong. And as I've said already, the reality is that if we'd left the EU with no deal and just imposed tariffs, our economy would have thrived. We'd have done much, much better.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a couple of headlines. And of course, we're famous for in this country, United Kingdom, for our cartoons and political comments around them. And the king of all cartoonists, I suppose, is Matt of the Telegraph, and he's published two insightful cartoons that I shall describe and ask for your comments on, Sid. The first one sees two rather elderly ladies chatting, walking down the street, and in the opposite direction comes a Scotsman, fully regaled in his kilt. And a comment of one of the ladies is it true that under every Scotsman kilt you will find a motorhome?
Well, obviously, this is a reference to Peter Morrell stealing 400,000 from the Scottish National Party, 125,000 of which was spent on a motorhome. And by the way, what I find incredible about this, which people aren't talking about, is the fact that the Electoral Commission have a budget of 43 million a year to supervise political parties, demand detailed accounts, which have to be submitted on time every year. If they're submitted literally 2 or 3 days late, you face a fine from the Electoral Commission. and it's their job to look at the accounts, to examine them, to make sure everything is bona fide. So what's gone wrong? Why isn't anyone saying to the Electoral Commission, how did you approve the SNP accounts when all this money was missing? You didn't do your job. That's the reality of it. But you see, the truth is that the Electoral Commission target political parties they don't like. And the SNP are on the left. So the Electoral Commission give a light touch to regulating the SNP, but they've made a massive, massive error in this case. And frankly, heads should roll over this in the Electoral Commission.
Absolutely, we should be causing stink about this, but it's
Mm,
going to be washed
mm.
away in the usual manner, the long grass bit. Let's have another Matt cartoon. Basically, there's a picture of a lorry, pre-election lorry with a big poster on top driving up and down the high street, and it says, "Vote for Burnham for a bright future for Andy Burnham." And that sums up, doesn't it, what's happening maybe?
Well, it's very interesting that I've seen all the posters that they're putting out at Macclesfield. They're not saying vote Labour on these posters. They're saying vote for Andy. And Labour aren't even mentioned on the posters. So yeah, absolutely. The whole process is, bring back Andy to Parliament. Andy will save the nation. He'll get rid of this terrible Keir Starmer, and we'll have this wonderful new Prime Minister. And this will make the Labour Party popular again. But because the Labour Party are currently so unpopular, we can't mention their name. It's very interesting. Very
Isn't
interesting.
it? Isn't it? And let's hope the good people of Makerfield realise what's happening here and put
Yeah,
their cross
yeah.
where it should be put. Um, Perhaps one should, before we leave that territory, should also question self-seeking Rupert Lowe. Now, he's going to take, according to certain polls, about 7% of the vote, which could be the swing factor. He's only doing it for himself, just like Burnham. There's no difference between them.
Well, it's interesting that he's got so much money from Elon Musk, who's coming along and offering his support to Rupert Lowe. Um, One of the things that interests me about Rupert Lowe is that he not only fell out with Nigel Farage, having just been elected as a Reform MP, literally within a very short period of time, he's then launched his own party, which is Restore, which was going to be done with Ben Habib, who'd also launched his own party, Advance UK. The two were going to work together to set up a new party. But I actually looked it up, and they actually said that they fell out with incredible acrimony. So he fell out with Ben Habib as soon as he started trying to work with Ben Habib, who was the previous deputy leader of Reform. So this man has a history of falling out with people very quickly who he tries to work with. So to me, that means that alarms have to be ringing. And he is a wealthy man. He's got the support of Elon Musk. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think he's somebody that any serious person should get behind. And he will take votes off Nigel Farage off Reform because he's got so much money and so much power backing him. But I think when he comes under serious scrutiny, when his policies come under serious scrutiny, that he will fade into the background.
He certainly talks the talk, and most people agree with what he says. But as you say, there's a background here. There's previous here. There's a history. Let's see what that develops like. We're going to go back over the pond, Sid, now to the States, of course, and the Vice President, who's been quite verbose in many ways, even today. But he's speaking about the problem that we have in the UK, but basing it on America. And I'll read you what he said. And this is from America. Do you compare with what's happening in Britain as I read? Imprisoning illegal immigrants who commit crimes costs the Treasury in America 60,000 to 120,000 per annum for each inmate. Some states, including California and New York, extremely left-wing states, of course, allow illegal immigrants to collect health and care benefits. Compare with UK. They actually allow illegal aliens to benefit from the American people's health care programs, which is just a disgrace and travesty, J.D. Vance says. He carries on. I mean, if you go into an emergency room, A&E, you should know that you're waiting in line with other American citizens, not with people who have been placed to the front of the line by a fraudulent Medicare aid program. The Vice President said the impact in medical care is massive. Finally, it's driving up costs for everyone. It's making it harder to access healthcare. It's absolutely fleecing the American taxpayer. It is a lose-lose-lose situation. They've got the same problem, Sid. Or is it not as bad as ours?
No, I think America has had the same problem because Biden let in something like 5 million illegal aliens. He had an open borders policy and people were absolutely flooding it. Trump has closed the borders since he's become prime minister. They've actually got nil illegal immigrants now entering the United States. But obviously, they've still got an awful lot of people there from that Biden let in and were let in also by Obama. We got the problem, and Tony Blair had an open borders policy. He was allowing immigrants to flood in, and we haven't closed the borders since. So it's continued. If you're looking at the overall situation, I think, frankly, that the whole amnesty system needs to be overhauled. You see, the whole amnesty system was put in place for people who were fleeing a war or fleeing a country and had got nowhere to go to. And the amnesty system says that they should be given asylum at the first safe country that people come to that are fleeing from wherever they're going to, the first safe country. And it's like it was agreed internationally that people should be allowed to be given asylum, if they were fleeing from another country and needed help, and then they should be given help and support. And that's the international situation. Now, what's actually happened is that we've got an agenda of people leaving countries in order to make other countries more Islamic. That's the reality. So people have been leaving Afghanistan and lots of other Pakistan, Bangladesh, a lot of other Muslim countries, and it's happened as the same in South America. Muslims leaving one country in order to go to another country to make it more Islamic. Now, that's not what the asylum system was set up for. But so the asylum system has been radically abused. Now, because it's been so obviously radically abused, it needs to be overhauled. And we need to have a new system where we are able to distinguish between people who are fleeing something and genuinely need help and people who are arriving on a Hajj, on a journey, which is what, incidentally, Mamdani, the new mayor of New York, has said it is. These people are coming on a Hajj, in order to change the policies of the country that they're coming to. Those people should not be given asylum and should not be given any financial help at all in any way, shape, or form. And by the way, these people are also paying smugglers, enormous amounts of money to get them here. So, so who's paying that money? I don't know. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's not actually all being paid by Saudi Arabia or by some of the wealthy Muslim states, but paying people to come to and sending them here.
Yes, indeed. And it's interesting times on that front, as we've mentioned on many occasions. I want to talk a little bit, don't turn off, folks, about political philosophy, what we really believe in politically. The word, the fashion word that's been with us for quite a while, actually, in our gaslighting society, maybe, is empathy. Oh, we've got to have empathy, whether it be illegal immigrants or anything for that matter. And empathy means, of course, being alongside a person and experiencing what they are experiencing, and you can show empathy, sympathy, whatever, and identify with them. Well, it's got out of hand, and we are a soft touch. Many people say this. UK is a soft touch. We can go in there as an illegal immigrant. They're not going to get rid of us, or very few, if you run into bad luck. There are other things that we've always held as being important in the past, Sid. First of all, justice. Justice on the streets, justice through our policing on the streets. Seems to have been put on the back burner when you can freely rob shops up to £300 and know that you're not going to have your collar felt. Rightness. There's a difference between justice and rightness. Righteousness, a Christian would term that. Well, it will all go away in the end. Some people think that means. No, it doesn't. Justice and rightness goes together. There has to be black and white in certain things. It's not grey like it seems to be these days. Then there's another word called resilience, not caving in at the first instance. Now, we've not had resilience for nearly 30 years, but it's crept up. You can point to the rape gangs. There's been no resilience there. There's been a lot of political expediency. And some commentators are now coming to the conclusion that we have truly got Marxism ruling the United Kingdom at the moment. Call it what you like, another name, but it's Marxism. Sharing the cake out, as you've mentioned on many occasions. Well, it's all right, but who's going to make the cake in the first place? And it's giving often to the wrong people and for the wrong reasons. So is our political philosophy gone down the wrong track?
Well, caring for the poor and caring for the needy is absolutely fundamental to Christianity and a very, very important part of what we stand for. But you see, Jesus also said that we have to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So we have to be wise as to exactly what is going on when people are tricking us and playing the system. And that is what is going on now with, as I've already said, with the asylum system, and also goes on sometimes with benefits. So people are literally milking the system to claim whatever benefits they want to claim, and they become far better milking the system on benefits than working. Now, the Bible also says if a man will not work, neither should he eat. So there also has to be a case where everyone has to be encouraged to work, and we have to get encouraged people to get off benefit system into work. And if people are literally refusing to work, which can work, then we have to address that and look at it. So along with absolutely caring for the poor and looking at those who are most in need and providing for them, we also have to address issues where people are abusing the system and not be taken for fools. That's the reality of it.
Talking about philosophy, let's going on to trading philosophy, which is very important. And there is more than 4,000 miles between Europe and America in this. And I'll explain. Japan and Germany have always been upheld as great manufacturing nations. They've got the right attitude and they've got the wealth or had the wealth in the past. And both of them produce fantastic pieces of machinery, whether it be cars or washing machines, you name it, they've got that philosophy. And we've got a bit of the philosophy left. We've not just gone to invisible exports in the UK. We've still got some manufacturing. Some people say as low as 10% now. Golly gosh. But that is the fact. Now, if we're talking about philosophy, there are many, many companies, and they're gigantic companies now in Japan, in Germany, and certainly in Britain, that have gone down a different line and talking of philosophy and how it affects a company is that it is conceded now in the West that you as a company have not got the same aims as you had, which basically, if you wish, is making some money for the benefit of everybody. But it's changed. When a private company gets successful, it becomes a social institution whose first duty is no longer to create value, but to preserve existing arrangements. Now, that can be summed up, if you wish. The American corporation, as a contrast, is not a miniature welfare state. It doesn't protect its workers in the same way. Now, the question is that good or bad? With American companies, they can fail very easily. Their shareholders lose out, their workers lose out, but it gives them a mobile situation whereby they can start again and recruit new people and pay decent wages again. But if you've got a basic philosophy of no failure, as we have in our education system at the moment, nobody can fail, then eventually it's going to catch you out, Sid.
Yes, it is important that companies are allowed to fail, although he's absolutely right that we have a system in this country of paying people redundancy. I mean, because it does have and can have a devastating effect on people's lives if they've been employed for 20 years and given their lives to a company and they're suddenly told with sometimes with very little notice, I'm sorry, but the company's I'm not doing very well. It's gonna be going into bankruptcy and you're gonna lose your job. And it's absolutely right that in those circumstances that people should be given some money because people tend to get into debt relying on their income. And if you're just suddenly made redundant with no money at all, then you're going to be in serious financial problems. So paying redundancy is absolutely right, but companies have got to be allowed to go under. And the reason for that, frankly, is because companies have to produce what people want to buy, and they have to produce it efficiently. And if people are no longer producing what people want to buy efficiently, then you can't just have them carry on producing stuff inefficiently and which people don't want to buy, but subsidized by the state. That was what was going on in the 1970s in industry after industry, and it was a disaster. And that's what Margaret Thatcher stopped by literally stopping all the subsidies and replacing it with capital investment. So she was creating new industries, producing things which people did want to buy and producing them efficiently. And that was the way in which she transformed the economy. It was very painful initially. I mean, in 1980, 1981, I mean, we had a terrible recession because she just stopped all the subsidies. But over time, she succeeded in transforming the economy, as I've said. So, yeah, absolutely. Companies have to go under, and companies have to be able to produce things efficiently and effectively, and people have to produce stuff that people want to buy. If they don't, then sorry, companies have to fail.
Yep, interesting. It's tough at the top and it's tough at the bottom. And talking about that, finally, Sid, we've got to come on to our sport section. And at last, England have won a test match. They had to doctor the pitch, didn't they, to get a win?
Well, there's no guarantee that they were going to win that match. I mean, because they batted first and got a very low total. But the reality is that when New Zealand came in, they got an even lower total. And then in the England second innings, they still got another very mediocre total. But when New Zealand came in, they got an even worse total. So, yeah, I mean, the England bowlers did well and the England batsmen did well enough. I mean, they got two batsmen that got 50s, which on that pitch was an achievement. So, yeah, I mean, it was a bad pitch doesn't necessarily favour the home side. It favours the bowlers absolutely, but the batsmen have to work extremely hard. And fortunately, the England batsmen worked harder than the New Zealand batsmen.
Yeah, it was fascinating, but the real story will come, of course, at the Oval, where it will be a flat, hard pitch and have consistent bounce. We'll soon see then whether England have turned a page. Frankly, I'm not sure. You still got the Ben Stokes McCullum partnership, which I've never approved of. You know, the baseball thing that we chat about from time to time. Certainly, I cannot commend dear old Ben Stokes, and it must be in the twilight. He's 35, isn't he? Of his career. But some of his comments have been bizarre, to say the least. And if you want somebody live at the Apollo that will F and Jeff, Benjamin, maybe he's not the captain that we think he is. I think a new captain and a new backing to him is going to be the real answer to this. But let's see how the summer goes on.
We do have world-class batsmen in Root and Brook. I mean, they're both superb batsmen. That's the reality of it. But Root proved not to be a good captain. So Stokes has proved to be a better captain than Root. That's the reality of it. But we've got some excellent cricketers there, and Atkinson has just come in, Robinson has just come in as bowlers. They proved to be very good bowlers. So we've got some good cricketers. So we'll see what happens.
Who really picks the team, Sid? Is it the backroom boys that I'm questioning?
Well, I don't know. The answer is I don't know who picks the team, but whoever does pick the team, obviously they're going to take notice of the talent, that is there in county cricket, and
Yeah, and that's another long conversation we've not got time for. But I miss our slow bowlers. It seems to be their hen's teeth. They're scarce. And this now has spread to Test cricket. I mean, it's always been bitty in the short game, although slow bowlers have had fantastic success in taking was-bam cricket by the scruff of the neck. And you need guile, and they've got the guile, and they get batsmen out. But in a Test arena, we didn't see one ball bowled.
well, as I say, it does depend on the pitch. You see, I mean, in Lords we had a very much a fast bowler's pitch. That's the reality of it. If you've got a flat pitch, then the spinners are going to be needed to come in and probably bowl a lot of overs and get people out.
There you go. We've got to go, Sid. I've got some dynamite here, but we'll save that because it's World Cup starting. We'll talk about that next week, and it's very contentious. So that's a bit of a teaser. Thanks, Sid. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.